Good afternoon, Prince fans. Late summer 1984, I was a freshman in college, on my own, sort of, and ready to embrace all the things college life had to offer. With all the experience I had that first year and throughout my college years, the one that stands out the most is when the movie Purple Rain debuted at the Student Union. I'm telling you. I, along with hundreds of my fellow 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, jammed into the Union to watch what has turned out to be an iconic and cult favorite. All of us singing along to every song because you know we had already got the cassette tape. Loudly, of course, I might add, and dancing until we were exhausted. I am Joy Mex, Chief of Staff for the DC Public Library. I am thrilled to join you for this incredible journey through the life of one of the most gifted artists the world has ever known, Prince. It is also my pleasure to welcome you to the Martin Luther King Memorial Library and to the launch event for the library's Discover Summer, a summer filled with cultural and reading events at libraries across the city. My friends, my family, my coworkers know that I am a die-hard Prince fan. I'm telling you, I used to buy the 12 inches of Little Red Corvette just so I can see what the song was on the B-side. How many of you all, do you know that, right? You know that. And this is why I'm so looking forward to today's discussion. Probably like many of you, I was a fan long before Purple Rain catapulted Prince to pop stardom, and even before 1999 cracked the door open for him on pop radio stations. But if you're also like me, I am ready to hit the dance floor, whether it's the dance floor in the basement, in the backyard, on the front porch, or in the club when I hear these two words: dearly beloved. And still, 40 years later, Purple Rain is celebrated and loved like it was released last week or last year. Beyond being a gifted musician, Prince was an activist who was unapologetically himself and fought for artists' rights. He was inspired by the artists before him and inspires those who came after him. Prince was in a league of his own. And that's why we're here today, to celebrate the legacy of an artist who changed the world. We're here to go behind the scenes of Purple Rain and learn how Prince turned his vision into a reality. And we're lucky to have Andrea Swensson, author, podcast host, and journalist based in Minneapolis, and Elliott Williams, WAMU arts and culture reporter, to guide us on that journey. The DC Public Library is about bringing community together, where people can come to learn, grow, and discover the stories that shape our world. Today's event is just one example. Thank you to the DC Public Library Foundation for their support of this event, gifting the book to the first 25 registrants. Copies will also be available for sale by local bookseller Solid State immediately after the program. We invite you, and some of you have already started doing this, to join the conversation by scanning the above QR code to submit questions. So let's warmly welcome Andrea Swensson and Elliott Williams and get ready to go on a journey through the making of one of the greatest albums and films of Prince's career. And stick around afterward for the Prince party on the rooftop. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joy, for that wonderful introduction. As Joy mentioned, my name is Elliott C. Williams, and I am the arts and culture reporter for WAMU, Washington's NPR station. I want to start by thanking you all for joining us and spending your Saturday with us. Please, if you could, silence your cell phones. It would be very much appreciated. We all want to be present today. And if you have questions, as Joy mentioned, please submit them through the QR code. I'll be reading them in our last 20 minutes together. I'll be reading those questions, and afterward, you're all invited to join us on the library's beautiful rooftop garden for a book signing complete with DJ Remy spinning Purple Rain among other Prince hits. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Andrea Swenson. She's an author, podcast host, and music journalist from Minneapolis. She hosts the official Prince podcast and has contributed music journalism to numerous publications, including NPR Music, Pitchfork, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, City Pages, and Minnesota Public Radio's music program, The Current, another public media person
Oh,
here,
yes.
where she previously hosted the local show. Andrea's first book, Gotta Be Something Here, The Rise of the Minneapolis Sound, was released in 2017 by the University of Minnesota Press and honored with a Minnesota Book Award. She's also the author of the new book, Deeper Blues, a heartfelt biography of the nonagenarian blues musician Cornbread Harris. What a great name. And of course, she's the author of this fantastic book she's now holding in her hand. Just take a look at it, it's gorgeous. Prince and Purple Rain, 40 Years, which commemorates the 40th anniversary of the Purple Rain film and accompanying album's release 40 years ago. Andrea, thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me and for being here. I just love that Prince brought us all into this room together right now. That's really special.
He really did. I feel the presence today. And I'm going to do something a little odd. I'm going to start with the end of the book because I think it's really important to the storytelling of this entire book. In a final passage, you describe meeting Prince at Paisley Park, one of his former studios and homes in Minnesota, and how that meeting changed you. And I was hoping you could describe a bit about meeting him and what were some of those things that you talked about 10 years ago.
Ooh, yeah. It is strange that 10 years have passed because it's still such a vivid memory, as you can probably imagine. Spending an evening with Prince is something I will never, ever forget. Yeah, so I was already active in the scene at that point, working as a music journalist, and had kind of landed on his radar. And he called me out on the 30th anniversary of Purple Rain to the day. I had just done a special on The Current about the anniversary, and I'd interviewed Bobby Z, drummer for The Revolution. And I got this email from Bobby that said, P wants to meet you tonight. Can you be at Paisley Park at 11 o'clock? And this was at like 6 o'clock at night. And I said, P. And I said, yes. And then panicked for the next 5 hours about what to wear and what to do. And yeah, it was a whole scene. So I get out there, and at this point I'd gone out many times for different events, and sometimes it would be a DJ dance party and Prince might not show up, or he might poke his head out just for a minute. Sometimes you'd get out there and it would be a concert and he would surprise and play for 2 hours. So I had no idea what to expect, but when I pulled in, the parking lot was empty. And Bobby Z was standing on the sidewalk, and it was just me and him. And as soon as I got out of the car, Bobby said, I think we may have hit a nerve. And my heart just plummeted, like, oh, are we in trouble?
Uh-oh, what did we do?
Did we get called to the principal's office? And so we got let in. Prince came out right away, shook my hand, looked me right in the eye, and stared into my soul with his gigantic eyes. And we started talking, and it took me a few minutes to kind of acclimate. But as I've reflected on that experience now, we talked for over 2 hours. It's hard to summarize because there were so many different directions that it went in. But what I really think he was trying to do is to prove a point that anniversaries were completely meaningless to him. He was interested on the next thing and what he was doing then and looking into the future. And at one point, he led us down to the studios, and we were walking down this hallway behind him, and he kind of was mocking Bobby and I and saying, I don't know why people have to do that, talk about anniversaries. Bobby, do you remember when we were in high school together? And then he swings the door open to Studio B, and he goes, this is what I'm focused on. This is what I'm doing now. And he played me music from 2 albums that he had in the can ready to go that he would release that year, one with Third Eye Girl and one solo album, Artificial Age. And point taken, Prince, you know? It's pay attention to what he's doing now. And why obsess about this? But ever the dual Gemini, he was working on a remaster of Purple Rain. He knew that the anniversary was important. He was working on this big renegotiation with Warner Brothers Records to get ownership back of his master recordings, and as part of that was going to help them reissue the album. So he knew it was important, but also didn't want to really acknowledge that it was important.
So he knew that the fans cared about his legacy, but he was always looking forward.
Yes.
Now, I know in some of our discussions before this, you mentioned that Prince was a fan of you and your colleagues' work at The Current, which is Minnesota Public Radio's music program. How did it feel knowing that Prince was paying close attention to your reporting? I get nervous knowing my parents are listening to me, so I can't imagine the legend Prince.
Well, I want to say, first of all, he was a member of Minnesota Public Radio. I love that. It was important to him to support his local public station, so become a member today. Yeah. I don't have your 800 number handy, otherwise I'd pitch. So it's kind of a funny story how I got into his orbit. I had started covering him more regularly. He had been living in LA and came back to Minneapolis in about 2012 and was putting together this new band, Third Eye Girl, and started doing a lot of things around town. So he had these shows that he played at the Dakota Jazz Club, which is like a really intimate 250-seat theater. He played 6 shows, and it was under strict lockdown with no phones, no cameras, no nothing. But I was going to be reporting on it for my job, and I was going to write, a review of the show, and needed some kind of image. So I brought this to show you. I drew this little drawing in my. Is that working? We'll see. Nope, I went too far. Spoiler alert. I drew this little doodle in my notebook. This is Prince and his band playing at the Dakota Jazz Club. Can't you tell?
I'm not going to comment on your drawing skills.
I am not an artist. Disclaimer right away. But I thought it was kind of cute, so I took a picture of it. The whole thing is maybe 2 inches tall, and I put it in my review as like the picture from the show. And then the next morning, I got this email from what I thought at the time was Prince's manager, but I've since learned from working with people that worked for him that it was him. And it said, Prince would like to own your drawing. Can he have it?
That's so Prince.
And I said, sure. I brought it to the next night at the Dakota on like a little thumb drive, and gave it to his manager. And then that next day, he released a recording from that show with that as the cover art.
That's beautiful. Were you honored or terrified that your sketch was out there for the world?
I still have no idea what to make of any of this. I mean, it's still as odd and hilarious to me as it was the day it happened. So that started this new relationship where I would get these emails and invitations, and I started going out to a lot of the events that he was doing at Paisley, and then I would write about it and post it. And as time went on, he got more active on Twitter, and I brought this because I'll never live this down. He would
Your
tweet.
name in all caps. What could that possibly mean?
And look, this man is so inventive. He even came up with a new way to tweet. This is how he would send out links to things that he was interested in, with the all caps writing before and after it, and the link in the middle. So that was a review I'd written of his piano to microphone show at Paisley Park, which was sadly the final time that I was able to see him perform out there. But to have him want to share my writing in that way is just something that I'll always treasure.
That's beautiful. And along those lines, in your acknowledgments, you mentioned that the writing of the book, you pulled on over a decade of interviews you did. Tell me about who you spoke to make this book happen.
Yeah, so, I was actively covering Prince when he was alive, and then unfortunately, shockingly, we lost him. And something that happened pretty much immediately is that people started wanting to tell their Prince stories. I think a lot of people that worked with him were nervous when he was alive about how much they should say or could say. He was such a private person in his personal life that there was always this kind of sensitivity around talking about Prince. And then after he died, it became this way to remember him and honor him and keep his spirit alive. So I started interviewing people just kind of out of necessity, because they were literally calling the Current. Like, hello, this is Susanna Melvoin. I was engaged to Prince in 1985, and you're just like, okay, the tape's rolling.
I'm sure he had a lot of fiancés calling, you know.
And just this constant stream of like, beautiful memories pouring out of people, and such heartfelt stories, and experiences of working with him on recordings and performing live with him. And so it just started like kind of instantly. And then we launched a podcast pretty quickly at The Current called Prince Remembered, which was basically just a place to put all this stuff as it was coming out. And then after the estate was kind of getting more organized and deciding, what they wanted to do long term, we started talking about making an official podcast with them, which is something that a conversation had started with Prince when he was alive about working with him on starting. He wanted to own his own radio station in Minneapolis. So we had already kind of laid a little bit of groundwork there. So yeah, over time it just became a huge part of my work, that I was doing all these interviews all the time with people that knew Prince. And at this point it's been over 150 interviews that I've done, some people multiple times about different eras, and it's just so incredible. And the odd thing is there's no two similar stories. Everyone has their own unique experience that they had with him.
Speaking of that, starting off the book, the foreword, by Maya Rudolph, right? Great singer, comedian, former SNL cast member, of course. How did you discover? I didn't know she was a Prince super fan, or that she had a cover band, Princess. How did you learn this? And how did you connect the dots and meet her?
Yeah, I reached out to her when we were working on the Sign of the Times podcast. I had already interviewed Fred Armisen, and Fred and Maya did this sketch on SNL, Prince Show, if you remember that, where she played Beyonce and he was Prince, and the whole thing is hilarious. They did it a few times on the show, and so when Sign of the Times rolled around, I knew that was one of Fred's favorite albums, and I wanted to talk to him about it. And then I kind of floated this idea of like, what if we brought Maya along? And at this point we were totally locked down with the pandemic, so the three of us got on a Zoom call and ended up hanging out for like 3 hours just talking about how much we all love Prince, and we each had our own unique story of meeting him. And we listened to music together and cried and just had this like really beautiful like friendship Prince moment. So when I started working on this book and we were thinking about a foreword, she was just the first person that came to mind, because I really love the way that she talks about him and her relationship to him, and you can tell there's just so much love there.
I was shocked to find her Instagram handle is Princessagram.
Yeah.
That's her official one. So let's get a little bit into the meat of the book, and you start with talking about his Minneapolis beginnings, his roots. And specifically the Minneapolis sound, and how Prince saw the good and the bad of Minneapolis. Can you describe the Minneapolis sound for folks like me who had just heard about this when reading your book, and how it influenced Prince's music?
Oh yeah, I could talk about this for hours, so feel free to. So I've done a lot of research into Prince's early life and the music scene that birthed him. That's the subject of my first book, and specifically the Black community in North Minneapolis where Prince was born and raised. And what I learned in my research is that Minneapolis is and continues to be very segregated. This is something I've observed just myself, but I knew that there was a history behind it. And when he was coming up in North Minneapolis, he was in this very small, tight-knit Black community that was pretty much cut off from the rest of the city. And it was very difficult at that time for anyone in that neighborhood to be booked to play gigs anywhere else in Minneapolis. The clubs were very segregated. There was a lot of discrimination, a lot of systemic racism. So I think at the root and the core of the Minneapolis sound is a defiance from Prince to figure out how to break through that. And he was very strategic early on, and he was studying his father, who was a jazz musician who, when he was a kid would have to literally play behind a curtain at certain venues when he was playing behind exotic dancers and things, because Black people weren't even allowed in that club. And he was witnessing these things at age 6, 7, so it's informing his worldview. So when it came time for him to graduate from high school and start to really figure out how he's going to break into the music industry, you see how intentionally he integrated his band. He included white people, Jewish people, women, and made this, very mixed, very 70s inspired band. and was able to play places like First Avenue, this club that he made famous in Purple Rain because of how strategic he was.
That club still exists.
It
right?
is,
Still,
yeah. Oh, yes. So I think when you talk about the Minneapolis sound, of course, there's the musical way to describe it, which is, at the time there were all these cutting-edge drum machines and synthesizers, and Prince is bringing in those sounds to replace like a horn section that you might hear in a funk band. So it automatically gets kind of, there's this time stamp on it and this sound to it, but I think at the root of it is this desire to create a truly integrated musical experience and to make music for all people. I talked to one of the Warner Brothers executives that signed him when he was 17, 18 at the time, I think, and his name's Lenny Waronker. And he remembered going into the studio with Prince for the first time as he was auditioning for the label, and Prince looked him right in the eye and he said, "Don't make me black." And of course, Prince, as a proud black man and hugely proud of his role in the African American community, he wasn't saying, that he didn't want to be known as a black person, but I think in the industry at that time, it was so deeply segregated that he knew that if he was marketed only to black audiences, he would end up only on black radio stations, only playing these certain kind of clubs, and he wanted to make music for all people. So he was so smart about that at such an early age, and I think that's really at the core of what that Minneapolis sound is.
Yeah, I read that quote, "Don't make me black," and I paused. I'm not gonna lie, I paused and thought about it for a while, but I think you said it beautifully. And when you talk about his band, he had multiple bands, but the Revolution specifically, tell me a bit about how they represented his drive to be intentionally diverse, forward-thinking, push boundaries.
Yeah, so, Bobby Z was the first person that got brought in. He met Prince when they were still teenagers, and Prince was working on his demos for his first record. And he said that Prince was really inspired by a lot of the kind of genre-bending 70s rock bands at the time. Earth, Wind and Fire, Fleetwood Mac, I guess, was one of the favorites. He loved Grand Funk Railroad, which is kind of like one of the more surprising things on he had a mural at Paisley Park with all of his influences. Grand Funk Railroad right in the mix. So he was really inspired by that kind of eclectic band lineup. But then as time went on, I should say he always had a woman in his band, even in high school. Andre Simone's sister Linda was a keyboard player in his high school band Grand Central, so there's always a woman present, which I think is incredible for that period. But he had, he found Lisa Coleman, incredible keyboard player, piano player, pretty early on around Dirty Mind. He found Matt Fink, Dr. Fink, right in Minneapolis. He was a kind of a keyboard wizard and someone that could keep up with Prince in that way. Brown Mark, who Prince named that, Mark Brown is his name, joined the band when he was 19 years old. His first show with Prince was opening for the Rolling Stones when they got booed off the stage and had bottles of Jack Daniels thrown at their heads. So welcome to the welcome to the band. Yeah. And then Wendy Melvoin, another person that joined when she was only 19 years old, her very first show with Prince officially was the night that they recorded Purple Rain. So the opening bars of that song, those incredible chords that are being played by Wendy, that was the first time they'd ever played that in front of an audience. And it was recorded for posterity and turned into the recording for the film and the movie.
That's a great transition, because I wanted to ask about Wendy Melvoin. You write that she knew immediately in those first few chords what they had on their hands. You quote her saying, "We just knew. And I knew it in Prince's face too, because he kept having me play it longer and longer and longer. We knew it was something." He had many other great records before Purple Rain, but what was it specifically about this album, this project, that changed the trajectory of all of their lives?
I think it was a few things. I mean, up to that point, so much of what he did was alone in the studio. He was so talented at every instrument that he could spend sometimes 24, 36 hours alone in the studio and come out with a fully produced track that he played every single part of. But I think around the time of 1999, which was the album right before Purple Rain, he started collaborating a little bit more openly with other people in his band. And this is even a plot line in the film, is he going to take Wendy and Lisa seriously and listen to their tape? And that ultimately becomes, in the film, the Purple Rain song that we know now. That's a fictionalized version of the dynamic, but I think that was really happening in his world. I think he was opening up a little bit more and starting to trust these people that he had brought into the fold and starting to feed off of them just as much as they were feeding off of him. So I think what you hear with a lot of those recordings, and the fact that the live recordings were chosen ultimately to go on the album, is Prince really embracing them as a band. You know, it's the first time that he put out an album that was co-credited with a band. Prince and The Revolution is Purple Rain. And I think that's really powerful, and it shows where he was at in his creative evolution of wanting to absorb these things from these other people.
Yeah, I'm going to pause real quick and ask a question from the audience that's pretty relevant to this topic here. Do you think Prince considered the success of Purple Rain a double-edged sword? Thank you, Troy, for the question.
I do. I think he may have even used those words. As part of the research for this book and just research for all the various things I've done, I've scoured a lot of his interviews over the years, and he didn't give any interviews during the Purple Rain era. He had totally locked out the press and wasn't interested. But later, he would reflect on the period, and he described getting to a certain point in the Purple Rain tour where he's having to play the same songs night after night after night, and he was having like an existential crisis about it. It was not something that he was comfortable with. He was such an evolutionary spirit, and having to stick to a certain set was not something that was satisfying to him at all. So it started to really torture him.
And the tour, in fact, right?
Yeah, so the Purple Rain tour was supposed to continue on and become like a world tour, and he cut it off after 6 months. And when I interviewed Bob Cavallo, one of his managers in this period, he's still sad about that today, 40 years later.
What could have been, yeah.
He's like, if only, and he was like, he should have done a Purple Rain 2. Like Warner really wanted him to just keep going and make another album just like that and another film just like that and just keep the train rolling.
Yeah. That tension between the industry and the artist. It's interesting, nowadays, artists on that scale, it's not uncommon to see them do a big feature film or a movie. I think of Beyonce, Taylor Swift, right? At the time, was that revolutionary for an artist to be the artist behind the film, be the one saying, I want this movie, and then bring their story to light?
I think so, yeah, because, you had certain rock films, but it was, I think, less of a creation from the artists themselves. They were more starring in something that had been written by someone else. And Prince was so involved in the creation of this film. There's stories of early on, years before Purple Rain was actually made, that he would carry around this notebook, and it had a title called Dreams. And he was starting to draft what a story could look like. After he died, they put out a book called The Beautiful Ones that included his sadly very unfinished memoir that he wanted to write. And in the book is included his first draft of the Purple Rain script. So it was definitely a vision for him and something that he knew, early on that he wanted to make. And I do think that that is really unusual. That an artist would have that comprehensive of a vision so early in his career. I mean, he was, 24 when Purple Rain came out? 26 maybe? I can't do math in my head while I'm talking. He was young, and he had already done so much. Purple Rain is his 6th album. That's something else I think people kind of forget about, that he was just creating so much so early on in his career, and this was just another way that he could expand his work into multidisciplinary areas.
Absolutely. Now, we can't talk about Prince without talking about his style, his spirituality, and his sexuality that came through in the music. And I was talking to friends and family before this conversation about Prince, and my mom said, she and her friends loved him, but back in the 80s, they didn't really understand him or understand his style. It's safe to say he pushed boundaries, subverted gender norms with his clothing, his long purple trench coats, crop tops, eyeliner, big hair. Sometimes no clothing at all, right? And so what do you think he was trying to communicate through his appearance and his style?
Well, I know what he said, which is that he told Arsenio Hall in, I think it was 2014, he gave this great interview with Arsenio towards the end of his life. He said, when you're 20 years old, you're just looking for the ledge. And I went there just to find it. And for him, the way that he dressed was a way of expressing his complete creative freedom and to push every boundary that he could find. There's a great story that Bobby has told me that they were backstage at a show once early on in Dirty Mind era, and one of the managers came backstage and looked at him, and at that point he was wearing a gray trench coat, bikini briefs, and a bandana, and that was it. And the manager's like, Prince, you can't go out there in your underwear. And he goes, fine, I won't wear underwear then.
Oh, that's perfect. So, a question from the audience here, from Jeff. How did Prince support people in places in Minneapolis, both publicly and privately?
Oh, there's so many stories that are so beautiful, and he was so private about his philanthropy and his support of all these different organizations. He would regularly send tens of thousands of dollars to nonprofits in North Minneapolis that were doing things. He was specifically very passionate about childhood education and music education. So a lot of programs got that kind of private support from Prince in the city. But the thing that's really poignant, you know, I was looking back through all the Purple Rain era, is that even the recording of Purple Rain was a benefit concert. He was, you know, very early on in his career wanting to do these things to give back, and the Minnesota Dance Theater was the recipient of the proceeds for the night that he played Purple Rain at First Avenue. They were in dire straits financially, and he had been using their studios to rehearse the band and learn choreography, and had been working with the teachers there. And so they threw this concert, I think it was 2 weeks before it actually happened that it was even planned, and just announced, like, I found one ad in one of the alt weeklies that ran an ad, but otherwise it was word of mouth, totally sold out, and they ended up getting more than enough money. It's $25,000 plus in one night to catch up and recover and be a strong organization again. The really tragic thing is that news just broke about 6 months ago that the Minnesota Dance Theater is actually starting to close down again because of financial straits. And I can't help but think if Prince was here, that he would do something about
absolutely.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was shocked to learn that that was recorded there. But then learning so much more about him, it's not surprising. You know, you talk a lot in the book about his faith and how there are sort of hidden messages of God and salvation and things like that, and sometimes hidden in sexual lyrics. Can you tell me a bit about that? He was obviously pushing boundaries there too.
Yeah, he was masterful in combining spirituality and sexual innuendo. That was a true calling for him. But yeah, the interesting thing about some of the stuff on Purple Rain is, you know, Let's Go Crazy. That is a very spiritual song for Prince, and he years later told Chris Rock that he had to hide the message in these lyrics. He didn't feel like it would be played on the radio if it was explicitly like a Christian rock song. So Let's Go Crazy, he's talking about de-elevator, not the elevator, which is code for Satan. And he wants you to punch a higher floor to stay, you know, devoted to God. So, and of course there are explicit religious tones as well with, you know, I would die for you. I mean, he's literally singing to us as a deity, which is also, you know, maybe something that you kind of sing along to, or you see it as it's used in the movie where the father in the film says that, so it's all kind of tied together, and then later you listen to it and you're like, oh.
It makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah. Someone asked if you have a specific piece of Prince memorabilia or something that you hold dear as a music journalist and fan.
You know, I mean, on a personal note, I bought him a gift that I was going to give him to say thank you, and before I could give it to him, he died, and so that is like very special to me because it was something that I was like getting ready to give him. I honestly, like, the coolest stuff that I have has all been given to me in the last 8 years from fans. When I go out to events, so many people in his fan community are so passionate and so creative, and I've gotten handed so many little things that people make, you know, pins and bracelets and jewelry and just, yeah, really beautiful tributes to him, and I have a lot of it, and I'll never get rid of any of it because it speaks to the impact that he had on so many people.
Are you able to share the gift you were planning to give?
It was a necklace that I bought in New York from this African jewelry maker made by Tuareg women, and it just symbolized it was like these 3 women had made it, and I was like, oh my God, he's gonna love this because he's in this Third Eye Girl band, and he's all about the especially lifting up Black women, and had been working with so many women throughout his whole career, and I was so excited to get back and give it to him, and it just didn't. I was actually the thing I was waiting for is to find a nice enough box. Which is so stupid now. I'm like, I should have just given it to him.
I'm sure he would have appreciated it regardless. Well, going back to Minneapolis, can you speak? This is actually one of my questions. Can you speak to the importance of the Way, the community center in North Minneapolis, and how it guided Prince in his youth?
I love thinking about and talking about the Way. So it was this community center that was actually opened in the immediate aftermath of unrest that swept through the city in the late 60s. There were 2 different summers in Minneapolis where there was political unrest and racial unrest, and it's a whole backstory that I won't go into now, but it was very impactful in this specific neighborhood near where Prince was growing up, and they ended up taking over this abandoned building and turning it into this very makeshift community center where young men specifically could go and find jobs. It started as a woman at a phone just lining up jobs, and then it turned into an educational center. They had a lot of classes on African history and cultural history, and they had recreational facilities, so there was a basketball court and a ping pong court, and if you know anything about Prince, these are things that he had a lifelong passion for, That all started at the Way, and they had a music room with instruments that were donated, and all of these musicians that we associate now with the Minneapolis sound, like Prince and Morris Day and Andre Simone and Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, Sonny Thompson, who Prince renamed Sonny T later and would join his NPG. These were all teenagers in the 70s hanging out at this community center and getting this really rich education in music and culture and playing their first shows and really experiencing that joy and love of being a musician. And it's incredible to think about that history politically. The real tragedy or irony, or maybe both, is that after the Way ran out of money and was closed down in the 80s, they bulldozed it and replaced it with a police station. And it's now the main police precinct in North Minneapolis. And even more tragically, in 2018, a young unarmed Black man was shot and killed by the police right in that spot. And there was an 18-day sit-in by Black Lives Matter activists right on that spot where the Way sat. So it is extremely historic, important ground for that part of the city, and yeah, what a rich legacy that it has now, that it gave so much culturally to all these artists.
Absolutely. I love hearing you talk about all the different people he gave a nickname to.
Yeah.
You seem to have a knack for that, giving people names.
Yes.
Talking about the album again, I'm a big rap, R&B, hip-hop fan, and I think a lot of my friends who also are fans of those genres would be surprised to know just how much Prince used drum machines and was big into music technology. Can you talk about how he was sort of an innovator in that space in creating the album?
Absolutely, yeah. It is so fun to hear Susan Rogers, who is his main engineer in this period. She is just an incredible person. She has a PhD and is a professor at Berkeley and can talk about the brain in ways that will just blow your mind. But so she witnessed Prince, getting these Linn drums, the drum machines, basically hot off the press as they would make them. They would send them to artists like Prince, and they had one at Sunset Sound where he recorded a lot of the studio recordings on Purple Rain. And he was immediately, not satisfied to just use the presets that came with anything. So he was tuning it down an octave. He would plug in his guitar pedals and tune it down in all these weird ways and plug things into it and see what that did. And eventually that's how he came up with this, what they call the knocking sound that you hear on, When Doves Cry and Beautiful Ones and so many of the songs on this record. That's him just messing with this drum machine and figuring out how to make it sound kind of ominous and odd and interesting.
And it's interesting because I think about artists today that do that, and I'm like, okay, now I can connect the dots. You mentioned artists that influenced him. Can you talk about some of those artists? I know Joni Mitchell is one of them.
Oh, yes, yeah. So there's this wall of influences outside of his main studio at Paisley Park, and it's such an incredible tapestry of faces and people. And he was so obviously inspired by, Black R&B artists like, Larry Graham, who ended up working with later. He was a huge Sly and the Family Stone and Graham Central Station fan. Followed, all of Stevie Wonder's work really closely, Earth, Wind, and Fire. But he was also very into Joni Mitchell from an early age, and I think you can hear it in his music in this really interesting way. And I think working with Wendy and Lisa, who are also huge Joni Mitchell fans, brought that side out of him even more. And you can hear it in the voicings of the chords that are in, especially like the opening chords of Purple Rain. I think that's such a Prince channeling Joni moment. It's the suspended 13th, chord that sounds really almost like unsettling in a way because it's so unusual. And I hear similarities too between some of Joni's work and some of what his father played as a jazz musician. He was also into these really unusual voicings and chords, so he grew up, exposed to all of those elements. But of course, it all just comes out sounding like Prince.
Of course, there's only one. Well, we have a few minutes left, so if you haven't gotten a question in yet, please use the QR code. You can send those in. We have a question from Jonathan. Which of the interviews or Super Deluxe album research have the most eye-opening revelations?
I personally really loved working on the Diamonds and Pearls project that just came out last year. Thanks. What a interesting period of Prince's life. He's coming out of the 80s, this decade that he absolutely dominated, and he's looking around for something new. So he ended up forming almost an entirely new band, plucking all these people out of the Minneapolis scene, really kind of rerouting himself in this place that he came from. And in the process of talking to all the band members and people that were around him in that period, I actually was able to track down his first serious girlfriend, who is name-checked in one of the Vault songs that they put out, Schoolyard. Her name's Carrie, and I went on this mission. I was like, I have to find Carrie. And I
Great
knew...
journalism. I gotta say.
I think it was literally like a New Year's Eve or something when I should have been having fun, and I was just in the archives of the public yearbook collections scouring, like, who's Carrie? I know she's in here somewhere. And I knew she was friends with his sister, so I ended up finding like her picture and her name, and then I realized Minneapolis is a tiny town, so like a friend of mine's ex-boyfriend's mom is Carrie, so of course. So I found her, and we met up, and it was a Sunday after church for Carrie, and she brought her 2 adult sons, and we listened to Schoolyard together. And if you know the content of that song, you know why I was sweating bullets the whole time.
With her sons there.
None of us made eye contact the whole time that song was on. We had just a lovely conversation up until then. And then I had to ruin it. And we sat quietly, and then it got like maybe 2/3 of the way through, and she goes, "That's enough." And then she's like, "First of all, that didn't happen. We never went to a party like that. Prince didn't even do drugs. I don't know what he's talking about here." And it was just like, wow, what a moment. So that was, those kind of stories and moments are at the core of why I do what I do. Like, I really love finding people whose stories haven't been told, and really finding like new ways to explore Prince. And it's really incredible to think about being, basically a decade in now of heavy duty thinking about and writing about Prince on a daily basis, and everything is still being covered. It's the story just keeps going, and there's new angles all the time, and everyone has their own story about him. And I don't know if I'll ever get tired of it. I don't know. I think this is my life now.
That's wonderful. Well, you mentioned the Vault, and your last chapter is about Prince's legacy. Tell me about the Vault and what it took to open it and what was inside.
Oh, yeah, so they had to call like a professional vault cracker when he died because, over time, he moved into Paisley, probably already had a lot of material at that point that went directly into like a bank vault with a big vault door. And then over time, that room filled up. There was just no more places to put anything in that. It was music reels, but also film reels and just anything that he was accumulating that was work product went in this room, got locked, and then they started putting things in the room that led to the vault, and that room got all filled up. And when he died, they said at one point, he would go through these different teams of people all the time, and even interacting with him in the time that I did, you never quite knew like who was his manager when. They just lost track of what the code was. No one knew. So they had to, literally get someone that was like a safe cracker to get the door open. And then they realized, there's stories about, as they walked in, they realized that it was not temperature controlled. There had been leaking. There was just a lot of things that you wouldn't want to encounter if you're a library archivist. They said there was a smell, like acidic smell in the air. So that stuff all had to very quickly be removed from that environment and is now housed in an Iron Mountain facility in LA, where it's being very tightly kept under wraps and lovingly protected.
So work is being done to preserve
Yes.
that legacy and what he's doing. We have a question about the movie. Did Prince explain why he believed Purple Rain could be made into a movie? Because he'd never done a film before, right?
I mean, because he's Prince. He believed that he could, so he did. That is why he directed Under the Cherry Moon, because he believed he could, and he did. That is why he wrote and directed Graffiti Bridge. That is why he made Perfumes, and he just constant creation and exploration of ideas, and the confidence of someone that just wanted to see it through and knew that he could.
Definitely. I have a sort of a personal curiosity here. I remember the big Super Bowl performance, halftime show, probably the best halftime show there ever will be, right? 2007. I'm glued to the TV. My brother's next to me. My mom stops cooking. We're all watching. God provides the special effects with the rain. Did he ever talk about that moment in your interviews or any interviews he did after that moment?
I haven't encountered anything in the published transcripts of things that he said. I think the band that was with him that night, they all knew that it was legendary. There's this classic story of, the producers came backstage as they were getting ready to go on, and they said, "Prince, it's raining." And he said, "Can you make it rain harder?" And he just embraced it and went with it. So I'm sure that he knew that it was, what it was, but I haven't encountered his own thoughts about it.
Yeah, you could tell on stage he knew how powerful that was. So we have time for about 2 more questions, so I'll pick something that you all have submitted. From Madhouse 8 to his next film, Graffiti Bridge, how would you describe Prince's evolution from Purple Rain?
Well, I think it's so striking that even Around the World in a Day was done before the Purple Rain tour rolled out. He was very eager to keep evolving, and that is such a different sounding record from Purple Rain. And then from there, into the remainder of the 80s, it's such an expansive time. He developed the Camille persona and had a whole record that was going to be devoted to that, voice and persona. He worked on the Batman soundtrack, which is
Batman,
such
right?
a good story. Batman is one of the first songs he ever learned to play on piano, which is something he told us all at the Piano and a Microphone show just a few months before he passed. He was reminiscing and learning, how to play off TV and learning these theme songs. Man from U.N.C.L.E. is another one that he learned on piano. And there's a story that when Tim Burton or someone from the camp approached Prince and said, would you consider letting us use Baby I'm a Star in this film that we're doing about Batman? He said, hold on. And then he wrote a whole album just for the film. And you can just see 7-year-old Prince being like, yes, this is my moment. But the evolution of that period is so incredible because, you know, the Revolution was disbanded by the end of 1986. He had a whole new band and a whole new sound. The band was expanding rapidly and evolving, and you know, he went from this really high production Love Sexy tour where there was literally like a car on stage and basketball hoops and everything to the Nude tour where it just got really focused in on the music. And then by Diamonds and Pearls, he just reinvented again and said, well, what if I do this whole other thing and, you know, make a funk band that has hip hop in it?
Because he believed he could. You know, I think you write about this in the book, the show he had with Madonna and Springsteen. Someone asked in 1984, did he see Madonna and Springsteen as colleagues, rivals, or none of the above?
Well, I got to see him play for Madonna in 2015, and I know that he regarded her as a colleague and a peer and a friend. They were very friendly when they were together, and he was definitely trying to impress her when he was performing for her. It was a really private show. There was maybe 30 people in the crowd at Paisley, and she sat on the stage right under his feet. And the thing I loved about that night is that Madonna looked at Prince playing guitar the way that we all do, which is like, wow. So you could see that there was a friendship between them. Bruce, I think he, I know at least in the moment, wanted to maybe disarm. There's a couple stories that I was told about when Bruce went out on stage, and at that time Prince had gotten so many different cues that he would give the band to get them to play different riffs and change around, you know, really quickly. And he's shooting out all these different cues to the band, but he's doing it intentionally behind Bruce while Bruce is trying to play guitar. And so it's just like, what?
Pranks?
And I think it was Bobby or Dr. Fink or somebody was like, can't you just show a little respect for somebody? Like, this is the
Help them
boss,
out,
you
yeah.
know? But yeah, just kind of a funny moment where he definitely wanted to keep him on his toes.
Any last words, Andrea, about the book and what it means to you and what it means to us 40 years since the album and movie came out?
Well, it's just so special to me that it's still so important, you know, that I was just at the Smithsonian yesterday and one of his cloud guitars is on display there, and I stood there and watched and started crying. I'm gonna start crying again. All these little kids just coming up and like playing his guitar and playing with the little knobs and taking their pictures with it, and that's like so what he hoped for, like in the world, is that, you know, we would continue to inspire new generations to pick up instruments and to become technically skilled and to try to pursue this as a form of creative expression, and to know that it's important to people still that, you know, we're alive to experience it the first time, but that it's continuing to be important for new generations is so meaningful to me. And I just feel so proud to be a Minnesotan and to be a person that, you know, got to exist in the same time and space as him somehow, that this legacy is just going to live on forever.
Andrea, thank you so much. Give a round of applause.
Thank you.
And please buy the book. You're all invited to join us on the rooftop where Andrea will be signing books, and you can purchase the book as well. And DJ Remy will be spinning the album and other Prince tunes. So thank you all for being so attentive and for your time. Appreciate it.